I think there's an echo on your side now. Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. This is Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and joining me today is Youri Smouter, host of the 1+1 program here on YouTube. How are you doing today, Youri?
Doing great, Chris. It's great to be back on your program. You know, when I was on vacation. I was on vacation in England, visiting a couple of comrades and so forth. And at least every other day of that vacation since getting back, August 3rd, I kept saying to myself, "Oh, I would love to talk to Chris about this. Oh, this will be a great thing for Chris's program."
Well, there's so much going on
So
in
it
the
is.
UK.
So it is great to be back. So it is very great.
Well, it's always great to have you back. I really enjoy talking to you, and I'm really looking forward to talking about Dexter because while I haven't seen newer shows, I'm a big fan of the original show in the first book, and I also think it really is important to understand what's wrong with the world as it's depicted in Dexter, and what the deficiencies of the show are.
Oh, definitely.
How much do you know about the 90s to early 2000s anti-hero craze?
Oh, I mean, well, like anybody, I was obsessed with
That's
the
where,
show.
and that's a good place to start it because, you know, The Sopranos was one of the first great big pay TV cable drama hits. It won Emmys for HBO and set off the competition between HBO and Showtime to do anti-hero shows, which Dexter, of course, on Showtime ended up being a part of.
Oh, and then not only that, but there was all, you know, I wouldn't say it was a golden age of television, but shows like Dexter, Sopranos, Breaking Bad, Weeds to a degree, and shows like The Shield, which, as you mentioned, are anti-hero shows. Although Shields, I think, is more of a fuck you. That the police are rotten apples. But that being said, it was sort of like the golden age of the anti-heroes, and for people like me who are mostly film buffs or you know, because I am a lefty journalist and way too obsessed with that. When you discover shows like The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, your response is, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that." And then with the rise of people binge watching and stuff like that, yeah, Dexter, Sopranos, Weeds, The Shield, Breaking Bad, and even the spin-off series Better Call Saul is more or less like a golden age of that
and
kind
The Wire
of stuff.
The Wire is all anti-heroes.
Yeah, no good guys in that show.
The closest thing to the good guy is the guy who kills and robs drug dealers. And now your sound went out. Oh no, now it's back, I think. Talk a moment.
1 2 1 2. Can you hear?
It went out a moment, but now it's back.
Good.
That was weird. Sorry.
But that being said, the reason why I'm also glad, we're we're going to kind of do a deep dive, with our critical lefty point of view on Dexter. Very reluctant to watch Dexter. I thought, that the thesis of the show, because I had several friends, including my sister, who were big fans of the show. But I was initially very, very reluctant to get into the show because basically I'm getting at an age where there's only so much violence I can take nowadays. And then even the whole thesis of, well, Dexter's a good person because he only murders serial killers. For me, as a person who's against the death penalty, that just didn't really.
Not necessarily only murders serial killers, but only murders really bad criminals who have gotten away with their shit.
That is true. He has killed people. Yeah, exactly. Spot on about that. And then, but then I ended up watching. Your film buff, I would definitely recommend films check out this channel called uh, the Vile. I think it's called the Vile Eye. The series is called
Yes, the Vile Eye.
Yeah,
you sent me some links from them with profiles on various villains.
Exactly. And then I ended up watching, several episodes of that, of course, of movies I had already watched, and I ended up watching, an episode on Dexter and an episode on the Trinity Killer, and I thought to myself, wow, this is quite an interesting. This is quite an interesting storyline. So I thought to myself, okay, let me check, and then I do have Netflix, so I ended up watching the entire series, which I finished just last week. Ended up watching the sequel, Dexter: New Blood, and apparently there is a new Dexter Resurrection.
Dexter Resurrection is the one that's out now.
And that being said, Dexter really does open up an interesting can of worms. It really does make you question a lot of things, like about police procedures and stuff like that. It opens up a whole lot of issues about the criminal justice system and the very disturbing statistics I'm about to give your audience, but the United States is the number one country in top 5, top 10, top 20. The United States leads the world in the amount of serial killers it has.
Also just in violence and murders in general.
On top of the gun violence and so forth like that, and so that.
But
so
that being said, it's not just. And the reason I mention it is because it's not just obviously we talk about serial killers are a cultural obsession of their own, which is almost worthy of its own show.
Yeah.
But there's also an obsession. There's a lot of violent crime in America compared to the rest of the world. There is a lot of unpunished murder in the United States compared to the rest of the world. The police solve rate for murders is something like 10%, 15%, 20%.
Wow.
It's not great. The number of crimes that are even properly investigated for more than a week is like a ridiculously small number.
Wow.
All about prioritization. And you have to remember once again that Western cops and American cops are the sort of prototypical and worst of Western cops, though I don't really think Canadian cops are much better. Looking at some of the Toronto PD's Twitter posts.
Oh no, exactly, and I would say I would say the exact same thing about Belgium. I mean, we were home to one of the worst, not just serial killers, but it was the scandal on how he got caught and how affair, which WikiLeaks revealed that a lot of conspiracy theorists who thought there was something not right about the official storyline have been vindicated. So that being said, So that being said, when I watched Dexter, which overall I have to say I gave it a bit of a mixed bag. There's elements of the show which is really good, elements of the show which are really bad. I sometimes even have disagreements with with fans of Dexter's, because there are some people who really hated like the last season, which I thought was okay. There are some people who really hated Dexter New Bloods, which I thought was actually the perfect conclusion to the story of yet another sequel to it. But that being said, Dexter really opens up a huge can of worms, and I think just like A Clockwork Orange, which as a leftist, I'm very critical of both the book and the movie, but it opens up an interesting can of worms. It makes you confront a lot of very, very difficult subject matter about violence. What is the best way to deal with violence? or this vague term of crime and stuff like that. And so, and it has been mentioned. I thought it would be, I just thought it would be very interesting, having just finished watching,
Well,
both
I think of
Dexter, the TV series, to do a show on that with the critical.
I think of Dexter from two different points of view. The first is what I was talking about before, is the anti-hero craze. And just again, to sort of put things in their context, it really started with The Sopranos. There were some shows before that, The Shield on FX. But The Sopranos was really this huge, big hit with critics, with audiences. It got lots of new subscribers for HBO. It made James Gandolfini a huge star who got to be a movie star in a way he never would have been if not for The Sopranos. And we get his great performances in movies like Get Shorty and The Last Castle because of The Sopranos. So you have to keep that in mind.
Oh yeah, definitely.
At the same, in response, Showtime, trying to compete with HBO, hired Genji Kohan to create Weeds, which was basically their attempt to sort of compete with The Sopranos. And Weeds is sort of the whole pretext for Breaking Bad before Breaking Bad. And Breaking Bad could almost be looked at, if someone wanted to look at it, as a male-centered ripoff of Weeds.
Yeah, actually, now that you think about it,
Weeds very much centers the problems of a mother and widow who is doing this to hold on to a specific capitalist lifestyle. Whereas it starts out on Breaking Bad that his family so that they'll be okay when he's dead, and
because he has terminal cancer.
Being a macho man, it goes way out of control, and he ends up pretty much wrecking his family.
No, and even losing sight of why he even got into this.
But it ends up being all about the anti-hero, whereas Weeds is about the whole family and how this ends up impacting the whole family. And it's just interesting, the difference between the female-centered and created Weeds and the male-centered and created Breaking Bad, which is sort of a ripoff of Weeds that goes in a different direction.
Yeah, and then on top of that, Dexter, I have to give credit where credit's due, because it is certainly not the first role of law enforcement, because Dexter, is a blood spatter analyst and helps,
and here I wanted to finish the second part of that thought, which is the second angle for Dexter is about someone trying to manage a disability.
Indeed, and actually, do explain more on that.
So Dexter is a compulsive killer, which is not his fault. It is a disability that affects his entire life. He is a compulsive killer because he is a survivor of extremely traumatic abuse and has a compulsion that he cannot manage. His father, his adoptive father, who turns out is also possibly his blood father over the course of the movie, but they never really clarify that for sure either way. But Dexter and his brother were locked in a container truck and had to watch drug dealers murder their addict and dealer mother. And as a result, they were extremely traumatized. I'm not going to give spoilers for the first season, but they were both extremely traumatized and damaged by this. And Dexter, early on in his childhood, after being adopted by his father, who was the cop, who was his mother's CI, who his mother was a CI for, rather, sorry.
Yeah.
His adopted father sees what's going on, that he has problems, and starts teaching him a code to manage his condition. And the code is, number one, only kill people who deserve it, which by his father's, because these are rules for getting away with it, by the way. There's a moral sense to it in that his father is a moral person who wants to protect his son and also wants to get some good somehow out of his son's problems. Though it's worth noting that Dexter is also an abused child in this sense, because he isn't given a choice by his father, and his father doesn't try any other form of therapy. It's assumed right off the bat that this is the only way to go. And we can argue about whether that's right or not. But anyway, he's a compulsive killer who is, number one, the person has to deserve it. Number two, you absolutely can't leave any traces behind it. And number three, absolutely no one can know. Yeah. And he's supposed to follow this code, and if he follows this code, he'll survive as long as possible.
Yeah.
And
so you can already see the get-go. I mean, I would just say to people, it's a show not for the faint-hearted. Mentally, I would say to people, you do prepare yourself for it, and it's not even because of of the violence in the program. In fact, I was actually quite surprised when watching the program. The violence, I mean, it's certainly not more excessive or over the top as
the violence
or breaking movies that people watch.
It's like Texas Chainsaw Massacre in that the original, in that violence is all implied and off screen in a way that allows you to imagine what is actually happening.
Yeah, exactly. And
keep in mind, despite the fact that everything gross actually happens off screen in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, almost everyone who saw that movie talks about it as being gory, despite the fact that it's not, because of the power of imagination.
But that being said, I think I also think. Funnily enough, I actually have seen. Funnily enough, I think once you've already watched a lot of violence in general in movies and TV series, when you actually do watch certain horror movies, and which also are not for the faint of heart, but having watched the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, most of the Halloween ones, Texas Chainsaw Massacres, Silence of the Lambs, and Red Dragon. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is actually quite tame compared to
Texas Chainsaw again. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not a gory movie. The people who saw it and said, "Oh my gosh, it's so gory," were thinking of the images in their own head that they created while stuff was happening off screen.
And I think a lot of people probably even close or a victim on goddamn, the hangers that people use, that butchers use for pigs and stuff like that. I think for a lot of people, and I can even vouch myself, I did this. We're already looking away from the screen. This is like,
yes,
it's certainly not any more violent than like Child's Play.
Well, it's like, Child's Play is actually the perfect example of the over-the-top gory slasher movie, and they're able to get away with it because of this tongue-in-cheek quality that it has.
Yeah, So that being said, with Dexter, yeah, I would say to people, it's not any more violent than what
And
we've probably
Chucky
seen.
himself, sorry,
And of course,
it just popped.
if they have
Chucky himself ended up with an FX series to capitalize on the very end of the anti-hero craze, and it just didn't quite work out.
Exactly. So, but going back to Dexter, so I would say to people, like, it's that Dexter is certainly not any more violent or depressing compared to something like Breaking Bad and The Sopranos. And you probably should ask people if they have seen those, or what movies have they seen where the violence was a little too much for them. Skin and Psyche is the very, very, controversial themes and moral questions.
Well, the moral
that it gets into.
The moral, yeah,
that's where I would say the show is not for the faint of heart.
Well,
if you are somebody that
in the first two seasons, you have the conflict between the anti-hero, Dexter Morgan, and the anti-villain, Detective Dokes. And Detective Dokes is, on the one hand, everything a cop should be. But on the other hand, he is an unprincipled, unethical, violent asshole who, even though he is actually right about Dexter, goes out of his way to person who has been nothing but productive for Dokes and his colleagues because he doesn't like him. Because let's remember, he has no actual reason of any kind to think that there's anything wrong with Dexter. He doesn't like him because he feels off, and he doesn't like he can tell he's got a disability, and he doesn't like it.
Oh my God! That was, by the way, that was exactly what I was thinking.
It's like, now just imagine that Dexter is autistic instead of a compulsive killer. Do you have any reason to believe Dokes would treat Dexter any differently if he were just autistic and not a compulsive killer? I want to think about that for a moment.
Oh no, definitely.
I mean, there's something, because Dokes has no reason to believe that Dexter is a bad person. Not really. He just feels something off about him in his social interactions. There's no reason for him to assume that someone is a sociopath as opposed to being autistic. He chooses to jump to that conclusion.
Enough, that also brings up a very, very important question, that if okay, actually, how should I say this?
Now, I will go ahead. I'm going to see if I'm going where I think you're going or not. I believe that real cops treat people the way Dokes treats Dexter and are wrong all the time. Was I right about where you were sort of trying to go, or was I wrong?
You are wrong, but you brought up very good points. But okay, but let me just say this. So already for our audience and those who may have already seen Dexter and have seen all of it, so you already know that it's even for an original novelist. So you have a serial killer, but he only kills other serial killers or criminals who
bad people and people who have gotten away with murder is the people who have gotten away with murder or some similarly horrible crime that caused people to die.
Exactly. And
my favorite episode, this doesn't give any spoilers for any of the greater plots, so I don't mind dropping it. My favorite episode is the episode with Tony Goldwyn as the really nasty, misogynistic psychiatrist who talks successful women into killing themselves because he doesn't like successful women.
Actually, wait. Well, which season was that?
That's in the first season, I believe.
Was that the one with? Was that the one with the the speaker. And he's not Jordan
The
Peterson
first
type of
season,
person. He's
the first season is the Ice Truck Killer season.
Yeah.
Tony Goldwyn is a psychiatrist or psychoanalyst. They always say psychiatrist in the TV shows, but the psychiatrist always really does what a psychoanalyst does.
Exactly.
But anyway, regardless of what he actually is, he's a psychotherapist who talks women into killing themselves. Tony Goldwyn plays him. He's a practicing psychotherapist. He's got lots of clients, and he has an unusually high suicide rate among female clients.
Mm. And these are the kind of people Dexter investigates, and Dexter wields justice on.
Yeah.
So already with that, and of course, and there is no doubt that
let's examine this deal's justice again, because again, Dexter is managing his condition. Dexter, and this, not too many spoilers, but the whole show is sort of Dexter struggling to try to develop some sort of morality when he really, because of his disability, doesn't really understand morality.
But it was never given that choice.
He was never given that choice, and there was no effort made to. There was no effort made to understand his disability. A bunch of assumptions were made about his disability, and his adoptive father chose to pursue a course without consulting Dexter to manage that disability. Now, there are lots of parallels to the real world in this.
But and that being said, but doesn't that already address a central problem when we talk about okay, specifically, let's talk about like serial killers and stuff like that. Killer has a deep mental problem that needs to be addressed, which I don't think the prisons do a good job of sorting. There's a whole bunch of stuff on sociopathy that. So, under the legal definition of sanity, a sociopath is sane. Because they actually are aware that what they're doing is wrong.
The sociopath doesn't understand social cues, and as a result tends to feel that other people are, and this symptomatically tends to show as seeing other people as less than or inferior or not real, less real. And so in this case, being a sociopath is considered a social disorder. The official diagnosis term now is antisocial personality disorder,
which I don't like. But yeah.
And then there are like 20 different subgroupings of antisocial personality disorder, some of which might actually be dangerous, and the majority of which would not be.
Mm-hmm.
And then there leads to another question of whether are people who kill people really part of this disability spectrum, or are they just people who don't give a fuck and don't bother to manage their condition and whatnot? And this is a whole question that is sort of unspoken the whole time in Dexter. Is, could Dexter be different? Does Dexter want to be different? What does Dexter want? And a lot of the answers tend to say that a lot of that Dexter is ultimately responsible for a lot of his own actions and own problems in real ways, but that he's reached a point in his life where it would be almost impossible for him to change course, and that managing it in a way that hurts normal people as little as possible is the most moral act he can take, Which is why in the very end you see of the original season, you see him in a very nondescript working class situation, not getting close to anyone. And that's a little bit of a spoiler there, but it doesn't spoil.
That's actually one of the best descriptions of Dexter, the character himself. No, that's like that.
But I mean, ultimately, his ultimate moral choice is that he can't involve civilians in his shit. That too many other innocent people are being hurt because he's trying to live a normal life. And that he needs to stop trying to live that normal life and sort of disappear into the underbelly of society.
But the interesting thing about that is, you know, in the kind of when it comes to Dexter, is, and this was something I always kind of had a problem with just not just with just the thesis of the show, and then when watching the show. Because there are you know, without giving too much spoilers away, but there are multiple storylines where people in the show are trying to catch Dexter for the quote unquote crimes.
Well, now this raises a question about one of my favorite characters, Special Agent Lundy of the FBI. Is Lundy really trying to catch Dexter in the second season?
Not really.
I mean, he's definitely trying to catch the Bay Harbor Butcher.
Exactly.
But one gets the idea through the whole season that, like Dokes, he knows something is going on with Dexter. Unlike Dokes, he seems to have a clear idea of what that is. And as revealed in the fourth season, the Trinity Killer season, before Lundy himself exits the show, you get the idea that he really doesn't have a problem with Dexter and thinks that Dexter should be turned against somebody like the Trinity Killer.
But that leads into the huge, big topics of Dexter, which I'm sure people constantly are debating, which is the following. So Dexter, again, the thesis is he only
kills people who deserve it. Let's really simple boiled down. He only kills people who deserve it. And most importantly, these are people who would deserve it by the standards of the society in which he lives.
But then already, if you're against the death penalty, you would already be against what Dexter does. But at the same time...
Have you ever watched Boston Legal?
No.
Boston Legal is David Kelly's most personal show in that it ends up being a lot of very self-indulgent moral speeches made by really, really excellent guy from the Blacklist. Why can't I remember his name right now?
David Spader.
James Spader, yes. The really, really excellent James Spader. Delivering these great moral speeches in the form of closing arguments for defendants who may or may not have a point even if they're guilty. And in defending a guilty man who murdered the person who killed someone close to him, he makes this argument that the death penalty is wrong, but that under some circumstances, personal revenge might be right.
But then right then and there, you know how my response to that is this just somebody who just picks.
No, let me give you an argument. Now you can make the argument that this is a logical rationalization of emotional feelings if you want, and that's a fair argument. But I just want to put out this hypothesis that potentially becomes. And I've already lost my train of thought, dang it.
Well, wait 3 seconds for it to come back, or should I already jump in?
So, Jump in. Sorry. Go ahead.
Feel free to interrupt. But no, but that being said.
Oh, no, I've got it. Okay. So the idea is it is wrong for society to kill individuals through the legal system, because the legal system is arbitrary and imperfect and does not care about the truth. At least under the you live in Belgium and you know people in Canada and the UK and the US. Yeah. So almost more than anyone else on my show, you understand the difference between English common law and the Code Napoleon. So,
go ahead.
Under English common law, there is an adversarial system under which nobody cares about the truth. They only care about which side can represent its case better and prove it more convincingly.
Which is deeply flawed, as you can imagine.
Which is deeply flawed on multiple levels. Now, with its own imperfections, which fans of English common law will pick apart to make it sound like the most horrific thing ever, Le Code Napoleon rests on the fundamental principle that the purpose of a court case is to find the factual truth of the matter.
Yeah.
And that ultimately the facts of the case allow the prosecutor and the judge and the defense attorney and the jury, if there is one, all together to determine the truth. And while you can pick apart all sorts of problems with the way this works in some countries where maybe there isn't good oversight of the cops or the judges.
Yeah.
At the same time, the core principle of we're looking for the truth is a better judicial principle than, well, which side can argue more convincingly?
Exactly. Or even the whole concept of innocence.
Well, and this is the thing. The concept of innocent until proven guilty is a legal concept that is intended to enforce certain fair rules on the trial because it is about who can argue better and not about finding the truth. This is also why knowing too much about the truth disqualifies you from an English common law jury. People who know too many facts of the case already can't be allowed on the jury. Both sides agree on that. And so, especially under English common law with its arbitrary rules and fictional boundaries, and really very small regard for the concept of fact and truth, it's wrong for the state to kill people. But if you have a situation where one person 100% knows another person's guilt and is acting with knowledge of guilt to punish or protect other people, that might be morally acceptable.
But that being
the example that I would give is John Brown.
The John Brown that tried to help.
The John Brown that chopped people up with broadswords because an abolitionist newspaper man was murdered by pro-slavery men in Kansas. Which brings us to something that Sean Connery says in The Untouchables, which absolutely applies to class struggle, if nothing else. They put one of ours in the hospital. We put one of theirs in the morgue.
But that being said, and in that context,
so John Brown was taking action against people who were part of the political faction responsible for the murder of Elijah P. Lovejoy. So he hacked a couple of people who he knew to be pro-slavery newspaper men to death with broadswords.
Which is interesting in and of itself because there's been lots of I guess you could say I need to look closer at this case, so I can't comment too much.
Now, in the end, he got hanged for trying to steal weapons from the Harper's Ferry Armory in Virginia in order to lead a slave revolt.
Yeah, exactly. There's been lots of writings by other historians who depict John Brown as just an insane person who didn't know what he was doing, whereas other people who have come to his defense in recent years have said that no, he was just a radical abolitionist who really did believe in ending slavery, and this was just his way of fighting back against a grotesque, unjust system.
Regardless of what one thinks about the morality of John Brown's actions, Malcolm X had something of a point when he said, if you want to understand whether a white person is really a friend to black people or not, ask him what he thinks of John Brown.
Interesting.
So what he said is John Brown didn't speak up for slaves. John Brown went to war against slavery and died for it. Frederick Douglass, in his sort of eulogy in newspaper columns for John Brown, said that I could live for the slaves. John Brown could die for them.
And then I think, when we talk about something like Dexter, one has to really question themselves. Okay, so if you are one of those people who thinks that the death penalty is wrong and Dexter himself is wrong for the actions he takes, then I want to dare people to say, well, don't we already do forms of what Dexter already does? In the United States alone, the U.S. and the Philippines, by the way, are the only countries where bounty hunting is legal.
Well, let's talk about bounty hunting.
Wait. But before we get there, so there's that. There are people, both liberals and right wingers, but even people who would call themselves leftists, who already do believe that there are some criminals who are just completely amoral, degenerate, and stuff like that, who think that they should be in jail. Now, if you're an abolitionist, you would know, having interviewed people like L. Jones and so forth, and even if you do elementary research into the prison system, you know for a fact prison does not rehabilitate serial killers or any other criminals.
Correct.
It's a place that you warehouse people for a period of time, depending on how awful the crime was.
Rehabilitation is like, quote unquote, rehabilitation from anything. Crime, quote unquote, addiction, physical rehab from an injury, any kind of rehab. The only successful if the person being rehabilitated wants to be rehabilitated.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who want to be rehabilitated badly enough are often succeed in rehabilitating themselves despite the rehabilitation systems around them that often harm them.
Yes,
rather than because of them.
And L. Jones, having interviewed her a couple of times, she had a great expression for one of the issues she comes across when she's trying to convert people to abolitionism and so forth, which is a lot of people. So even the most leftiest of lefty people who believe in social justice have this inner thing which she calls the cop in her heart.
Yeah,
I would call it a right-wing blind spot and so forth. So there are already some of us who believe that there are some criminals that deserve to have the entire book thrown at them. They deserve fire and brimstone sort of punishment and so forth. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a little bit of Dexter in all of us.
Dexter doesn't want to send anybody to prison. I want to be right up front about that right there, because
he believes in the death penalty.
Important.
He believes in the death penalty, though. He believes in enacting now his own death penalty.
So now I'm going to ask you a question. Because this is a really good. Well, actually, before I ask a question, I'm going to start, because I've already said some things that could set the opposite impression. I want to say that the morality of Dexter in the end is bad, but it's not necessarily bad for the obvious reasons. The biggest moral problem with Dexter is the ableist idea that Dexter's participation in normal life is bad for everyone around him because of his disability, and he must disappear into the underbelly of society to stop hurting other people with his disability, which is ultimately an ableist assumption.
Interesting.
They also approach the idea of a compulsive killer with a bunch of ableist assumptions that he must be a disabled person with no other option, including his father's ableist assumption that he is inevitably going to be a serial killer. I am going to control the kind of serial killer he will be. So there's lots of bad morality in Dexter. And I don't want to suggest that because I ask questions about some of the ideas Dexter asks about the criminal justice system, that I support the morality of the show. But I want to make it clear that the worst moral problems with Dexter are the assumptions that it makes about Dexter himself, the reasons that he does what he does, whether or not he has a choice to do what he does, and how he acts within the choices he can make. And the moral lesson of the show is that Dexter is so damaged and disabled that he cannot participate in normal life, must continue to pursue his compulsion, but must do it from the dark underbelly of society in a completely anonymous way that does not harm civilians.
But that raises a lot of questions, because I think, in terms of the themes, I'll say what
capital punishment is wrong. The state should not kill people. The question of whether individual people should kill people feeds into the whole question of violence in the first place, and what degree of, and when and under what circumstances violence is justifiable or not justifiable. Now,
In fact, that was the impression I got from Dexter. So when I finished watching the original series and then Dexter New Blood, the conclusion I came into, even when I was watching the series, the one sort of mental notes I took was I felt that the show did a very good job in its own way, however imperfect, of basically saying the following: violence is wrong, and violence only breeds more violence. Even though Dexter does kill people who you think deserve it, that is still wrong in and of itself, because if we think that Dexter can be somewhat reformed, and if he's even capable of himself of even distinguishing ethics, even though the ethics he's been brought up with is the code, why not we try to do that with all of society and have a better approach in dealing with serial killers and so forth, as opposed to just the old rack him and stack them in jails where they will also be beaten up and so forth, or in mental institutions where they are also abused by the states. And
my take on Dexter is that it falls into the same reactionary anti-hero school of thinking of the time. And I say reactionary anti-hero school of thinking because in the end, all these shows, Sopranos, Breaking Bad,
Yeah.
Weed, Dexter. They all end up having a very reactionary view of crime. Crime is something that happens because bad people.
Exactly.
And they
Oh, very
explore
much
this.
so. Very much so. They
explore this amorality, and it's very and while there may be critiques of consumerism and capitalism within this, they very much establish that. But yeah, these are bad people, and they do bad things because they're bad people, and we can admire their admirable characteristics. But ultimately, they're bad people, and bad things are going to happen to them. Now, the problem is it's very reactionary to sort people out into good and bad and worthy and unworthy.
And I think it's precisely that kind of mentality, that sort of right wing, fire and brimstone sort of punishment on criminals, which actually produces the problems.
And this is why
mass incarceration, so for like that.
And this is why you. Sorry, you finish first.
Yeah, because for example, we were talking. I believe the last time we talked, we were talking about why George McGovern, Michael Dukakis, lost, and Walter Mondale, and what was going on at the time, which if you look at the presidential debates, they don't expose this. But one thing that was going on at the time was the whole law and justice movement, which was which although originally it was just a dog whistle of we need to keep the niggers, spigs, and faggots in line, but the law and justice movement was a very, very reactionary movement, and that's which basically was like, okay, somebody commits a crime, you just throw them in jail, and you don't give them any sort of rehabilitation. Anybody who does commit any crimes, don't read them their Miranda rights or anything like that. Beat the shit out of them, lock them up, and throw away the key at them. If you have a mental illness like a Jeffrey Dahmer, who, by the way, is one of the few serial killers who, in many ways like Dexter, knew that there was something wrong with him, but the response of a Jeffrey Dahmer and so forth is often to just put them in jail, and if they get murdered by another inmate, they kind of got what's coming to them.
Yeah, but the thing is that for a very long time, the response to Jeffrey Dahmer was just to let him get away with it.
Yeah.
The fact that they specifically chose to give an underage the cops specifically returned an underage victim to his custody. Oh yeah, we're just having a lover's spat, dude. It's a teenager and a grown man.
But the Jeffrey Dahmer case also brings up a lot of issues, because when Dahmer was covered, I believe some of the awful press coverage was, well, he is a gay person and gay people are mentally ill, ergo. Blah.
Well, I mean, and now here we get it. Now here we get into this whole, well, so here's where we get into this whole negative thing where the right wing takes gay person and serial killer and conflates them and say serial killer because gay. No, exactly. No, that's not how it works. But at the same time, I don't want to be too sympathetic to Jeffrey Dahmer any more than I want to be too sympathetic to Dexter.
Okay. Interesting.
Jeffrey Dahmer, I mean, you can say all you want, oh, he knew that something was wrong with him. What effort did he take to find help to manage whatever was wrong with him before he got caught? None of the, I mean, there were multiple serial killers who have said, well, I'm so glad I finally got caught and can't hurt anybody anymore, but none of them tried to do anything to not kill people. I mean, ultimately, one of the messages of Dexter is that Dexter never even tries really to not kill people. He makes the same ableist assumptions about himself that his adoptive father made about himself, because he's been brought up to think this way.
Okay, but very interesting that you brought that up. But then, okay, let me present a counter argument to that. We live in okay, we live in the right wing world.
Yes.
We do live in the right wing world, and it even infects the best of us who even claim we want to eradicate right wingism and so forth. So that being said, okay, let's say, okay, let's just talk about Dexter. So hypotheticals and so forth. Let's say that Dexter, who certainly was who was somewhat aware of his violent urges and stuff like that, if he had told a psychiatrist and not Dr. Vogel all of these violent things, and confess that this is what I did to such and such an animal, this is what I did to such and such an animal, wouldn't the only proper response be that he needs to be in a mental institution? But the problem with mental institutions as they currently exist and have always existed is they act in many ways like
why is that the only proper response? That's an institutional decision. The idea that someone like that belongs in a mental institution is an institutional decision. And that's an institutional decision made for a bunch of reactionary reasons. But again, ultimately, and this is before I look.
But that's exactly what I was going to try to get into. Mm-hmm. So the mental institution, as it currently exists, and has always existed, it's just another form of prisons where you don't actually help out the patients. You drug them. Many of them are abused and stuff like that. But there's no actual effort in really getting to the nitty gritty of why does this person behave the way they do? How come this person isn't aware of? How come this person doesn't have any control over what they do?
So now here's where I would point out,
and I even think as a person who is an advocate that mental institutions should be merged with single payer systems. But that being said, as the mental institution as it currently existed is another form of the prison of just fire and brimstone and grotesque punishments for the patient and stuff like that.
And in another parallel with prison, it is deeply classed, which is to say that. Do you know? Well, actually, this is the perfect. Do you know the legal history in America of the not guilty by reason of temporary insanity defense?
Enlighten me in the audience.
Okay, before the Civil War, there was a congressman named Daniel Sickles, and there was a U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia named Philip Barton Key. Both of these men were married. Both of these men were philanderers. Philip Barton Key specifically had a reputation as a ladies' man who slept with lots of people's wives just to make them angry. Like if he didn't like you, he'd sleep with your wife to piss you off.
Consensual, I hope.
Who knows in those days? Because women had so few choices about sex, who knows? Who knows? Maybe yes, maybe no. Who knows? But anyway, that was his reputation. One of the women he slept with was Daniel Sickles' wife. Now, Daniel Sickles, for anybody who thinks that that the story that's about to happen sounds in any way like Trump talking about shooting somebody on Fifth Avenue, I do want to note that Daniel Sickles was a congressman from New York and was from New York City. But that said, Daniel Sickles accosted Philip Barton Key in Lafayette Square, very public place, said, "Damn you, Key, you have disgraced me," in very loud and public, "this is why I'm doing this shit" terms, pulled out a revolver and blew Key away in Lafayette Square. Key was the son of the man who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner, just for shits and giggles.
Interesting.
Daniel Sickles admitted that he did it, said, "I was insane." His lawyer was a very smart man named Edwin M. Stanton, who went on to become Secretary of War under Abraham Lincoln and Attorney General under James Buchanan. He was the one who thought up the temporary insanity defense. This just goes to show the kind of people who end up in high positions of power in our government. End result, it worked. Sickles was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He spent a few weeks in a hospital. He was released from the hospital as cured and not a threat to society. He was not reelected to Congress, but he was politically important enough to be given a general's commission during the Civil War. He lost a leg at Gettysburg in an unquestionably brave and heroic military stand, but was very controversial because this brave stand was only necessary because he messed up and disobeyed orders to boot. So there's all that, but it did not affect his life in any meaningful way, other than that he was not reelected to Congress.
And the point, but the point you're trying to make when it comes to mental institutions,
insanity. He never spent any. He was an insane murderer, and he never spent any time in any institution because he was a rich person, and it was understood that his insanity was temporary. Which is to say that for someone wealthy, mental health is something so minor that they can lie about it to avoid conviction of a crime, and no one cares. But for ordinary people, being mentally unstable ruins your life.
Which also brings up another important point, which is the eugenics movement, which was one of the first grotesque far right movements. Yeah, arguably one of the first, or one of many.
Well, the slavery apology movement is always high on my list. I mean, it's really worth noting. This is like so prophetic. There was a man named George Mason who, and I'm not saying he was perfect. He is a white liberal who owned slaves. Obviously, he's not a great guy himself. The fact that he deliberately set this stuff to phase out in time so he could still benefit from it personally is a criticism, but it still should be said. There was a man at the Constitutional Convention named George Mason who proposed amendments to abolish slavery and the slave trade over time. And the amendment to abolish the slave trade was eventually ultimately passed, and the amendment to abolish slavery wasn't. And he said, when he was arguing for the amendment to abolish slavery, we know slavery is wrong. And we say slavery is wrong, but we don't know what to do about it. But if we do not do this now, our children and grandchildren will say that slavery is good and should be defended. And his grandson was a Confederate named James Mason, who was one of the worst and nastiest apologists for slavery.
Yeah, going back to what we were talking about when it comes to mental illness and stuff like that, how it's weaponized. What you were describing with the story before James Mason is how more or less the eugenics and even left-minded people believed in eugenics, how they
and a rich person
and stuff like
rich person can say, I was insane, but I'm fine now. And it won't ever affect their life, even if they killed somebody because of it. But if you're a poor person, killing one person makes you a threat to society who can never be allowed to be free again, whether you're sane or not. Now on that note, it should be noted that serial killers outside of the picture, most murderers, the vast majority, kill one person for one specific reason and are never actually a threat to society again. The guy who killed one person 20 years ago has usually been a law-abiding citizen ever since that one murder.
Wow, that's
On
Very
the rare occasion they get somebody 20 years later, how often do you hear about him killing 3 more people unless he's an actual serial killer? When they get someone later, he's been living ordinary life, not hurting anybody. He just killed that one person. That raises a question: is there any reason for imprisoning murderers other than punishment? And then that raises the question: okay, so when we talk about threats to society, what are we really talking about? But that's a whole other argument, and I'm not going to get into that. We're talking about serial killers here, and the thing that I would say about serial killers is, again, what I came back to is, if I were Dexter's analyst, and he's saying, I feel this horrible compulsion to kill, my first question would be, have you tried not listening to it? What happens? Well, I need to kill people more and more and more when I don't kill people, and the compulsion just gets stronger and worse and worse. And eventually I can't ignore it. Okay, but when you reach the point where you eventually can't ignore it, have you tried to ignore it?
But Dexter is actually encouraged to listen to his voice as long as it's a certain type of person.
As long as he's going after the right people, he's encouraged to indulge this compulsion to kill. So this is really an assumption that something must be the way it is, while at the same time not really trying to understand it, or even giving a chance, giving the person experiencing it a chance to explain it.
But then
we only hear the explanations of the adult Dexter who has been shaped by life up to that point. We never hear, except in biased flashbacks, we never really hear what the Dexter before the code was experiencing or thinking or feeling. And there was never any attempt to engage with that.
Dexter, and even his brother, which plays a very special role in the first season, which I won't spoil, but that Dexter is a traumatized kid who saw his mother being brutally murdered, and it was his pile of shit adopted father who was the responsibility for all of that.
Yes.
And instead of and even though, okay, give the guy credit where it's credit due, he did take him to see Dr. Vogel, but he also could have taken him to see multiple other doctors for second opinions, and given him, if such a thing even exists, although it doesn't exist in fiction or even in real life, which is the problem with mental institutions. But if he had gotten him some proper help, maybe even consulting with people who have had PTSD or have a form of autism and stuff like that, who knows what would have happened with Dexter. But instead, because he's a piece of shit right-wing asshole who believes that all serial killers are just a bunch of amoral degenerates who can never be rehabilitated, you can never engage with them, they have to just be locked up and stuff like that. Doesn't that kind of remind you of RFK Jr.? But that's another topic altogether.
and it should be
we'll
noted,
never know. We'll never know.
It should be noted that in the real world, most sociopaths don't kill people. Most sociopaths have very difficult lives and struggle with their condition and run into all sorts of trouble, and many commit petty crimes or become
anchors,
become nomads of some sort. But most sociopaths don't kill people. Most murders are committed by quote unquote normal people who kill a specific person for a specific reason that is perfectly rational to them, and justify it with the intensity of their emotions, and then feel bad about it and never do it again.
But that also goes to that also kind of goes to show you. because there's been multiple times in the Dexter TV series where they compare his how can I say it? Okay, urge, whatever. His urge,
compulsion.
his desire.
In the course of the TV show, it is portrayed as an irresistible compulsion, which will eventually cause him to snap and do something, no matter how long he resists it.
Which is when his longtime girlfriend, wife, Rita, suspects something is a bit off about Dexter, and she thinks, and Dexter doesn't push on this, that he has a secret drug addiction, so for like that. The idea that Dexter is addicted to killing is sort of compared between people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol. Well, I do have to say the following: there are people. Now, I'm not here to deny that there are people who do not know how to control their alcohol and do stupid things and are abusive alcoholics and junkies and so forth. But there's many people who consume pot, who consume any type of drug you can think of, cocaine, ecstasy, and so forth like that, who are not Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin,
and this
or a person who does a petty crime to support their habits.
And this is,
I think it's also important to know that.
This is where you have the psychology versus eugenics question, where eugenics says that some people are simply born with a built-in propensity for addiction, and those people can become addicted to anything from driving fast to gambling to cheating on their wives. But it should be noted that an addiction to cheating is not an addiction to sex. It's an addiction to the thrill of cheating.
Interesting.
Very much like the thrill of gambling. It's, am I going to get caught cheating?
Interesting. That's very interesting.
Most people who cheat end up breaking up with the person they're with and in a relationship with the person they cheat, and then they end up losing interest in the person they're with because now it's not cheating anymore, and they start cheating with someone else because it's the cheating that matters to them. Then the psychological question is, some people have addictive personalities, and because of either nature or nurture are more prone to this.
And some people are better, and some people can manage it, because I personally believe that there's a little bit of alcoholism in everybody.
No, everybody. There is a natural propensity under capitalism to need to blow off steam and get out of your head.
Exactly.
Whether that is getting drunk or getting high on whatever or what. There is a natural need. Some people have a really intense hobby. Now, if you really think about it, is building model airplanes really less of an addiction than doing heroin? Look at how much money they're spending on those model airplane kits and how much time it's taking away from their ability to socialize with other people. We're choosing to say that this heroin addiction is harmful and this model airplane addiction is not harmful.
But all of that very interesting. But then if we go back to Dexter, hypothetically, or the real life Dexters of the world who don't engage
now, obviously, addictions like gambling and killing people are absolutely harmful. But then the question, but then again, it becomes, even with an addictive personality, this is where we get to the rehab point. If someone with an addictive personality really wants to quit badly enough, they can.
Okay, interesting.
That's just to the point of rehab, where again, in like the one thing that the 10 to 12 to 15% of people who successfully complete rehab and stop using have in common is they want to quit.
Okay,
Whereas so people who don't want to quit never quit.
Okay, So that being said, so going back to Dexter and real life, serial killers who don't engage in vigilantism but do kill
real life
their
serial
victims like that.
killers. Real life serial killers may not even kill compulsively. Let's put that part up front right there. The guy,
okay, but that being but that
the
being
happy
said,
face killer. The happy face killer is a
wait.
great example. Because the
But that
happy face killer is one of these guys who said in prison that he's glad he's in prison where he can't hurt anyone.
So that being said, because you were talking about how Dexter could have easily gotten help if he had wanted.
Not necessarily
to.
could have easily. Not easily. I never said easily.
Okay.
I said he didn't try to get help, which is different than saying he easily could have gotten it.
But if he were to be very
I would say that as a cop's son, he would have had a better chance of getting help than someone who wasn't a cop's son.
Exactly. But that being said, but would you not? Okay, so hypothetically, if he had gone to multiple doctors and so forth, wouldn't the only solution have been you put him into a mental institution and just pray that the mental institution is a 5-star hotel and not a mental institution that just treats its prisoners?
So let me ask you a simple question. Is that ever the right answer for anyone in a mental institution?
Is that I would say it depends on.
So now we're talking about the systemic problems that stop people who want to be rehabilitated from successfully rehabilitating. Which is that if someone does ask for help and if someone is not in a necessarily privileged position, like being wealthy or a cop's son, the system becomes a way of processing you and making you not be a problem for normal people. Whereas if you come from the right social class, and in this case, I think Dexter as a cop's son would have had an edge. If you come from the right social class, then the system's job is to protect you.
Okay. But then, so you say that, but
now I'm not saying that means that what the system does would necessarily be good. There's a lot of individual ableism and choice in that. Joe Kennedy Sr. still chose to have his daughter lobotomized.
Disgusting.
And so obviously, I am not going to say there's ever been a good time for disabled people. And I'm not, but my thing here is back to the question of disability itself. The assumption that Dexter compulsively must kill people because this is an inherent part of him is an ableist assumption that he is incapable of doing anything else and must be disabled.
Wait. You're going to have to repeat that because I think I got a bit lost on that.
Okay, so the ableism in Dexter is multi-level. There is the ableism that Dexter experiences, which is first the assumption that his problem is itself a disability and not a reaction to trauma.
Okay, yeah.
The second is the assumption that his disability can only be, quote, managed, unquote, in a very specific authoritarian way about which he is not consulted. And the third is that having established him as a disabled person, that his disability is so severe that he will harm all the people that he is around if he continues to live a normal life. Now, all of that ableism in the Dexter show aside, it is a misassumption to believe that real life serial killers kill people because of a disability, as opposed to real life serial killers choosing to kill people, regardless of whether they may or may not have a disability or not. Again, given the understanding that most actual sociopaths are not compulsive killers. And that when someone like the happy face killer actually describes the thoughts and feelings of their killings, they don't say, I was compelled to kill her, I couldn't stop myself. They say, well, I had been sleeping with her a while for a few stops, and now I was annoyed and wanted to get rid of her. And he's really that explicit about it. He doesn't say, I was compelled to kill her. He says, I wanted to get rid of her.
Okay, but, well, then that's a perfect segue for me to bring back up Jeffrey Dahmer then. Now, okay, so because Jeffrey Dahmer himself, the reason why, and okay, this might be a very controversial thing I'm about to say, but I'll say it anyways because we're having this conversation. That's one of the few serial killers I actually have a little bit of empathy and sympathy for. Why do I say that? Because as far as I'm concerned, and I even did several Google researches into this, he's one of the few serial killers who actually admitted, who actually expressed some form of remorse in the question.
Did he really, though? Did he really, though?
Wait, okay, so there's that point. He did express some feelings of remorse. He did ask an interesting question to his own lawyers when they were getting ready. Am I evil or am I sick? There's not many serial killers that even express remorse. Now, is that because they're
Now, this is why I ask, what do you mean by remorse? It is extremely common for incarcerated serial killers to say they're glad they're incarcerated where they can't hurt people anymore.
Okay.
Extremely common.
Okay.
It is extremely common for serial killers to say after the fact while incarcerated that they wish they hadn't done certain things. But they'll also say things like, well, I was really mad other people were getting the credit for what I was doing. Now, this is really why I always come back to the happy face killer, because he's very much an archetype in that he represents the element of choice that's involved in the way he talks about things, while at the same time saying he's glad he can't hurt anybody anymore and making cosmetic sounds of, if not remorse, acknowledgement that there is something quote unquote wrong with him, which he sort of uses as an excuse and blames for everything, while at the same time acknowledging the degree of choice in all of his actions and gleefully describing how much he enjoyed killing people. And so it's very hard for me to say that there wasn't an element of choice in what this person did when you look at all the people who actually are diagnosed with some sort of antisocial personality disorder who don't kill people.
But at the same time, I think the reason why a real life Dexter or a form of a Dexter or some kind of a person like Jeffrey Dahmer, why they won't confide in people. These are my dark thoughts. I've been having visions. I have this sort of desire to want to murder people,
if someone really has those desires.
Wait. Let me finish. I think the reason why those people would not confide in other people, the condition they have, is because they know that they'll probably be sent to a mental institution, which is a form of jail.
Sure.
And the existence of people who live there is as bad, if not worse, than somebody.
But then they end up in prison anyway. Serial killers tend to act unlike some other killers. Serial killers tend to eventually be caught through no fault of the police. Usually it's because the serial killer themselves screws up so badly so often that eventually people can't help but catch them. The main reason that the happy face killer got away with it for so long was because he was a truck driver without a permanent address.
Well, well, this is a whole other topic for another day, but that's very similar to the Yorkshire.
But that's the whole thing, is that Dexter actually becomes someone more like the happy face killer, except with the difference being his victims as his chosen way of not hurting innocent people. A nomad who moves around without really being noticed by anybody.
Which is an interesting bit.
And this is where I come back to the one of the core problems with Dexter is the assumption that being a serial killer is a disability. And then all the problems with how that disability is treated anyway. But I think my problem with that, now I do agree. I'm going to ask you a political question.
No, but
what is the usefulness? What is the usefulness? Unless we're actually ready to talk about the point, unless we actually reach a point where we have changed our view of disability itself.
Yeah.
What is the usefulness to disabled people who do not pose a threat to society in any way to blame serial killers on disability?
Well, that's an interesting topic in and of itself. But I think my problem with your thesis, where I would push a little bit back on, which now I do agree with you to a large extent, but I think my problem is if we are talking about just a few bad apples, which is somebody who does have a mental illness that has them murder people, somebody who does have a disability or a compulsion addiction that has them, go out murdering people or hurting somebody until you break them up. What should we do with them apart from?
But then, so now,
some kind of an institution.
But now we're
my problem with the mental institution is that we have to change the way we even approach it, and not just have this real life Stanford prison experiment where they themselves are abused in an institution or in the prison. Prison certainly doesn't rehabilitate them. I think we can all agree on that. But
there are problems with medicalizing aberrant behavior, though, and by aberrant behavior I mean stuff that harms people and or is socially destructive, not doing drugs or sleeping around in a way that doesn't involve cheating on people or manipulating people in abusive ways. But do we blame certain abusive behaviors for which there is no justification at all? Even, I mean, do we start blaming child abuse and rape on mental conditions and say that this is something that we can medically treat? And if we do we stop at stuff that's criminalized now, or do we use the old medicalization of prejudice against gay people to widen the choice, widen the degrees of acceptable behavior we medicalize? And how much does this medicalizing of unacceptable behavior harm actual disabled people who aren't behaving in unacceptable ways?
Very interesting question, and I'll just say right now, because I'm not afraid to admit when I say I don't know.
No, and I don't know either. I don't know either, and that's why I'm asking this question.
The best answer I can give to you on that is I simply don't know. I remember getting into an argument with a friend about allegations of a certain Russell Brand, not certain Russell Brand, the Russell Brand, about the accusations that he himself has engaged in serial sexual abuse and stuff like that. And my counter argument to the person is that if he has been engaging in allegations like that, he should be put on trial. Innocence until proven guilty is just as important as raping out the rapists and so forth. But the friend counter argued me and saying that the problem, she was saying to me, that Youri, the problem with your thesis on innocence until proven guilty is that most rapists and most people who engage in serial sexual abuse of their victims are not even put on trial and not even put in jail.
So
the person was saying that and said, what do you do then with that? And the only answer I can give is I don't know. I really honestly don't know. But we shouldn't throw away the whole concept of innocence until proven guilty.
I have a question. I have a question, though. Does the concept of innocence until proven guilty exist in exactly the same way in Belgium that it does in the UK? I may need to talk to a lawyer.
I'll give you two answers. The easiest answer I can give to you is that Belgium is a shitty Western liberal democracy that has all the flaws of shitty Western liberal democracy.
Well, so is France.
And the other answer I'll give to you is I don't know enough on that particular topic to give a better answer.
My understanding, and a lawyer should always feel willing to correct me here, but my understanding, based on the criticisms of Le Code Napoleon by Anglophone chauvinists, is that the Napoleonic Code does not provide an assumption at law of innocence for the accused, because the point is to find the truth. And therefore, the assumption is that we don't know what happened, and we're trying to find out. Not innocent until proven guilty, but we don't know whether he's guilty or innocent, and we want to find out which it is.
But I would say, why do we even have to cancel one or the other? Why can't we just take the best?
It's illegal. But that's the whole thing. These are legal standards. That's the next and important point. The British common law assumption of innocence until proven guilty is for the jury. It's for the jury in the trial.
Yeah.
In order to make a specific point, in order to be fair to the defendant who might be innocent. However, there are situations where we know for a fact, based on the preponderance of evidence, that someone is absolutely guilty.
Okay.
And we convince ourselves they might not be, because we have socialized this legal jury requirement. And it is very important to understand that innocence until proven guilty is for juries and for media covering trials, and not a sense of what the average person on the street knows or doesn't know, or what they are supposed to believe. If someone knows for a fact their rapist raped them, Innocent until proven guilty is insulting. And to tell them they have to treat their rapist as if their rapist is innocent until their rapist is proven guilty is even more insulting.
But aren't you then opening the doors to social media vigilantism? And hey, Dexter is all about vigilantism.
Hey, but if we're going to talk about social media vigilantism, the social media vigilantism that's been happening on Twitter over the last week is that a rape survivor was being attacked for supposedly criticizing the need for public defenders to exist, when what she actually said was that she wanted her rapist lawyer to die. This is two very different things.
I missed that. I didn't know that.
And should someone who says they want their rapist lawyer to die, which is a very understandable reaction, be the target of a vigilante attack defending public defenders?
But then because
now we're holding people responsible not just for disabilities but for feelings.
But Chris, if we could go back to good old Dexter and even some of the real life people that Dexter happens to murder in the end, I would then let me ask you the questions with the questions then, which is okay. We live in a right-wing world, and we're trying to eradicate that.
Dexter is a right-wing show with right-wing biases about who is and isn't bad as well. Let's remember that. However, and I want to say that, and I want to raise this as an important counterfactual to some of the bad things about the show. Dexter is a show in which a lot of the bad people are white and or members of the ruling class.
I don't know. Dexter does, kill a lot of those Latino murderers, rapists that Donald Trump
That's true too.
On, so.
That's true too. But I mean, your core villains.
The only good Latinos and black people are the ones that join the fucking cops.
Your core villains.
There is that problem.
Your core villains are a stereotypical white guy serial killer, the ice truck killer. A cop, Dokes.
And it comes full circle because Dokes is convicted ish for a crime he doesn't do, but it's Dexter that does it, but they frame him and it's like open and shut case.
And at the same time, you think Dokes deserves it because he's such an asshole, which is just kind of twisted. But at the same time, Dokes is a very good model for why cops really do abuse people who aren't guilty because they just think something is off about them. And it's like in 9/10 of the situation, a cop like Dokes makes the assumptions that he makes about someone like Dexter. He's completely wrong, and it ends up fucking up the case for years. And the big reactionary problem with Dokes is that his assumption about Dexter is right.
But I want to go back to what you were saying because I do have to take some issues with with what you were saying about mental institutions and so forth like that. So again, I just want to make it very clear: mental institutions need to be radically reformed. I think, and I do agree with you.
I always take issue.
Let me finish.
This is because I'm an anarchist. I always take strong issue with the word reform.
Okay, stop being the word police. Let me finish. Okay, so that being said, the way we even treat mental illness, all of that needs to be radically reformed. I believe in merging mental health with NHS types of systems. But all that being said, until we get there and until we even advance policies in which those are achieved, what do we do with the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, with the happy face killers of the world, or with somebody a hypothetical Dexter, more or less.
Well, and this is where it gets a little tricky. And it really comes down to a lot of social questions that can only be answered democratically. If we're talking about my personal opinion, it comes down to the fact that you can't make people want to be rehabilitated.
Wow, that's interesting.
One of the problems with A Clockwork Orange is that they can
I was just thinking I was just thinking you sound exactly like the priest in A Clockwork Orange.
They can coerce him to agree to be rehabilitated, and the rehab works. Whereas what we know from experience in the actual world is forced rehabilitation almost never works. In the rare cases where rehabilitation works, it is voluntary. And it is, as I said, people rehabilitating themselves despite the system in many cases. The prison system does not encourage criminals to stop committing crimes. People who do choose to stop committing crimes make a very difficult choice in a world that pushes them to remain criminals. It's the same way for people who quit actual addictions to things. People who stop doing things they're actually addicted to make a choice to break the cycle of addictive behavior and abstain.
Exactly.
And then if they really want to, they successfully abstain. But that forced abstinence doesn't work. Forced abstinence leads to overdoses, inevitably. Whatever the addiction may be. If it is a physically harmful addiction that can physically kill you, then an overdose is literally too much heroin or fentanyl in your system and you die or suffer a near-death experience.
But then I wonder, what is the best?
In the case of something that's not necessarily overtly physically harmful, it leads to some sort of spree that harms you in the legal system in a more serious way. Like if you're a quote unquote kleptomaniac, unquote, and you steal a bunch and you are unwillingly repressed for a long time, and you go on a massive stealing spree, you might be more likely to get caught.
And even then, the fact that you have that mental condition, prison is not the place you should be at.
Oh, I agree. Well, but then here's the thing: if we understand that mental institutions all too often are prisons, and that prisons are not the place to be, then this raises questions that can only be answered democratically about what to do with people. We can have our opinions all we want, but ultimately it's what society decides in some sort of democratic way that ends up being the reality. And it's really hard to say which of us is right or wrong, which just makes it that much, because I have very strong personal beliefs about the death penalty, and yet I think that if certain people in society believe cops should be killed and are willing to face the consequences, then that's a John Brown decision. And then the question becomes, how do we feel about John Brown?
No, but that's very interesting, and I think that goes to where you and me, we sort of defer. And hey, I'm willing to learn way more. I think it's definitely a new topic to me about disability rights and how we need to radically rethink how we view and even approach mental illness and stuff like that.
The most important fact of mental illness is that mentally ill people are more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators of violence.
Exactly.
And when we talk about the medicalization of serial killers, we risk changing we risk reinforcing the perception that mentally ill people are the perpetrators of violence rather than the victims of violence, which is not the case. Mentally ill people are overwhelmingly the victims of violence. Much of that violence is institutional. And most of the people that institutional violence is inflicted against are most certainly not serial killers.
In fact, I've read enough. I've read 2 books about Dr. Gabor Mate, and in his fantastic book, I'm blanking on the title. Bits about addiction. He clearly stresses a lot in the book that most people who engage in I'll call it self-destructive behavior when it comes to drug addiction, alcoholism. He said most of the time his patients and so forth, it's because of a trauma. It's because of a trauma, and Mate himself, who is a leftist, also blames a lot the society itself,
and then
pushes the people to self-medicate through addiction and so forth.
And then we ask, okay, and to what degree should society hold people who have been traumatized responsible for their trauma responses? I would note that many people have been traumatized but do not choose to shoot up their workplace. And that, I mean, I would not. I would never completely embrace nonviolence.
Actually, Chris, but what you just said brings up a very important point.
Yeah.
So, and for our audiences, I don't want people to get the impression that we're minimizing how awful addictions are, or that we're minimizing how awful serial killers are.
Let's note too that
it's very important to emphasize the following. And this goes back to the problems with the media, which is one of our favorite things. The media, whether it's corporate media, Western state media, or any kind of media, loves to over prop up and overanalyze and blow up the problem of serial killers, people who consume drugs and alcohol, who don't know how to control themselves and do stupid shit, when at the best of times, most people know how to control themselves, and if they are getting really out of control, a friend will take care of them and just put them to sleep. But the media and the movies do this, and Dexter is a TV series, loves to depict anyone who does alcohol, drugs, and stuff like that as a person who cannot control themselves, loves to depict we need the police as a necessary evil because of serial killers.
But that's the thing. Dexter proposes that we need Dexter more than the police. Now, that's the part that really needs to be analyzed. That I think we need to do a show on that.
Oh, exactly.
Now we're going to need to do another Dexter show and dive into more of this.
No, but in fact.
But I want to end with some of the thoughts that I think we should go with for the next show, and then ask you for your final thoughts on this one. But first, one of the most dishonest questions that people oppose to criminal justice abolition bring up is, well, what do we do with serial killers? And it's important to understand that Dexter attempts to engage with this question in some way, in good or bad faith. I think he's mostly in bad faith, and I think it's in ways that ultimately hurt disabled people and hurt mentally ill people and increase bad stereotypes. At the same time, I think the way Dexter chooses to continue serial killing without hurting quote unquote innocent people is how society encourages disabled people or people suffering from addictions to act, drop out of normal life, hide, don't show your face, don't be visible to anyone. And that is also problematic. And then the final thing is that most mentally ill people, as we said before, are vastly more likely to be the victims of crimes than the perpetrators of crimes. Are we wrong to even medicalize certain questions in the first place? I mean, you could reach a point, and this might be hyperbole, but it's real hyperbole. People really did this. The great thinkers, in many ways, of the Frankfurt School had the terrible anti-intellectual flaw of saying that the people who disagreed with them, especially the fascists, were just mentally ill. And if we're medicalizing everything we don't like, are we going to reach the point where we say, well, people who disagree with us are just mentally ill? Because the fascists say that. It's the fascists themselves who say, well, people who disagree with us are crazy and should be killed or institutionalized.
And I also don't want, and I also find the cheap responses that Hitler did these mass killings because he was mentally ill, I think does a disservice, and I would encourage
Hitler killed the mentally ill.
It does a great disservice to the system of fascism, why it needs to be studied. And I would just say to those people, actually read his fucking books.
Hitler killed the mentally ill and autistic people. That's really what we need to focus on if we're talking about Hitler. Hitler killed mentally ill people. So what are your final thoughts before we close?
Well, you brought up a lot of interesting questions, and I wish you had sent me some notes because I didn't do really good responses when it comes to the whole issue of disability and ableism and so forth. But that being said, Dexter, like I said, Dexter, not for the faint-hearted. Mentally prepare yourself before you do watch it because it does raise a lot of these questions. I didn't walk away with Dexter the same way my dear friend Chris did, and in that respect, that's what's really interesting about the show. It opens up a whole lot of can of worms. It makes us really question a lot of things, and I think that being said, going forward, and I certainly don't have all of the great answers as to what is the best way to deal with serial killers and so forth like that. But I think one way going forward is I think violence only breeds more violence, and I think we need to properly actually deal with the issue of trauma properly. When somebody has been the victims of whatever heinous crime, whether they've been the victim of a serial killer or a rapist, or my brothers and sisters of the Black community and the Indigenous community who all deal with intergenerational trauma on a day-to-day basis. What we are presently doing right now is not the answer, and we need to radically change that. How we do it, I'm open to many people's things, but I do think until we find a better way, the mental institution is sort of the only game in town. But that being said, we need to radically reinvent the wheel on that, because mental institutions being an extension of prisons and that whole cop within our hearts ain't working.
Well, I I don't see how we can abolish prisons and retain mental institutions without eventually medicalizing people into mental institutions and mental institutions becoming prisons. That's ultimately where I think that sort of thinking goes. And I think
and one more thing, and also while on that topic, this is probably why I've yet to fully embrace abolitionism, even though I have vast respect for it. Have read enough books by Andrea Ritchie. I've had L. Jones on the program. I think until a better world, a truly better, just world is built, this is why I'm still an advocate of community control over the police, in which the resources.
This is why I think, and now this is a very different thing from right-wing vigilantism, I want to note.
Yeah.
You should have community councils. Those community councils should be empowered to make decisions, having been democratically elected and with democratic participation of all members and with open public sessions. You should have community councils that are able to ask some of these questions and debate some of these things and make these decisions. Those community councils should be local. They should be making those decisions without any outside police agency. They don't need to be policed by a ruling class from outside. They can make decisions for themselves. At some point, it may be some people may need to be free to leave and go somewhere else. And
I think also, and that being said, when we talk about completely reinventing the wheel, this is another thing. Now, there's lots of great scholars on mental illness and stuff like that, but we also, with a social justice mind, also needs to challenge a lot of that, because even some of the best medical minds and stuff like that all have very deep right-wing blind spots, many of them expressed forms of eugenics and so forth. So for a better world, in a world where the solution isn't just mass incarceration or Dexter vigilantism.
Well, not Dexter vigilantism, but principled vigilantism. The group that fought slave catchers and helped runaway slaves escape to Canada was the Boston Vigilance Committee.
Interesting.
They were Christian anarchists. They figured, we're not going to respect this stupid fugitive slave law. We're going to resist it. And then people who weren't pacifists, like Frederick Douglass, took it a step further. Frederick Douglass said, the only way to make the Fugitive Slave Act a dead letter is to make a few dead kidnappers. Now, that's what Frederick Douglass said. Frederick Douglass is someone now that, no less people than PragerU feels comfortable appropriating to make a sum. Well, why didn't they just abolish slavery? Because the beauty of our system is compromised. No, you fucker. Frederick Douglass was talking about shooting people who were trying to enforce one of those compromises.
Yes, and I think
so this raises my question to all of my fellow white people. If the question that black people should ask white people is, how do you feel about John Brown? The question that white people should ask white people is, how do you feel about Frederick Douglass?
Also brings up a very important thing that which I think the Dexter show, however flawed and perfect it was, is that there's a little bit of Dexter in all of us. If you already support the death penalty, you basically de facto like a guy like Dexter.
But but Dexter never says the criminal justice system should be dealing with these people. Now, obviously, part of that is because of his problem. Obviously, his father wishes the criminal justice system could deal with these people, and this raises another whole right-wing can of worms. But Dexter doesn't say the criminal justice system should deal with these people. Dexter understands that the criminal justice system, by its...
The novel, the same thing? The novel's the same thing, never advocates?
I haven't even mentioned the novels today, really. Okay. The main thing I will say is that for people interested in the novels, the first novel will be very familiar to fans of the TV show as clearly being the first season. The fact that some characters develop in different ways at the end of that novel and in other books are because they made a conscious decision in the TV series to go their own direction after the end of the first novel rather than consult the author, Jeff Lindsay, and that Jeff Lindsay continued to write his own books without really thinking about the TV series very much.
Interesting. So two very different universes then.
Two very different universes. The only thing they really have in common is the plot of the first season of the season of the TV show is the first book. One character in the book who is very important in the TV series is killed off at the end of the first book. I won't say who, and you shouldn't either.
No, but and that being said, going forward, I think, look, the fact that we already have people who are parts of a broad movement that I call the nonviolence movement is a very good thing. The abolitionist movement, the fact that we already have that movement, which before was just about slavery, but now it's about,
as a white person. As a white person, I can't support or advocate for nonviolence because too many white people are using nonviolence as an excuse to justify the oppression of people in Palestine.
Exactly. But what I was trying to, but
I always have to come back to the no justice, no peace. We can talk about nonviolence all we want, but there will always be violence until we actually have a just world.
Exactly. The point the point I was trying to make is that the fact that you do have people who say that we do need to end the issue of violence amongst one another, either domestically and certainly internationally, that is already a good thing.
Yes.
Those are people you can already at least have a conversation, a rational one, about how do we build a better tomorrow.
Well, the basis of all justice,
but the big issue I think facing us is the fact that look, we have an issue of propaganda, and the fact of the matter is, and Dexter is just a much more creative, extreme form of it. But oftentimes when you do ask people, why can't we get rid of the police? They'll say that the police are a necessary evil because of the serial killers. And already there, that's a new front line that I think media critics need to be much more involved in, which is this overemphasis and the obsession of the true crimes, the serial killers. We need and the police as a necessary evil to fight them. We need to challenge that, because even the statistics have shown, as you've mentioned, is that most people who even are sociopaths and have dark things don't do serial killing. This is just an industry of corporate media and other medias who are obsessed with this topic, overblow the topic,
and those serial killers,
which doesn't even exist with reality. And ergo, people think you need right-wing assholes like a Nixon or an Obama or just cops as a necessary evil, when no,
I mean,
that's not the way forward.
In a more fair and just world, we might not even have serial killers. You can make a strong argument that serial killers are a pathology that presents itself in primarily white men of a certain class who feel a certain way, and that, that wouldn't happen in a classless society, or in a society where we had actually done something about racism and misogyny. Because a lot of serial killing, quote unquote serial killing, just breaks down to the fact that someone is racist and or misogynist and doesn't really have any brakes on that. The happy face killer just despised women and killed women because they were women.
John Wayne Gacy targeted not all of his victims were John Wayne Gacy, not all of his victims were gay, but he did target lots of gay people because he knew that the police wouldn't give a fuck about them.
Exactly.
And that's exactly why Jeffrey Dahmer targeted his particular victims.
Yes.
In fact, that's exactly why a lot of serial killers target prostitutes, particularly the poorest of the poor, many of them Black, many of them Native American.
That's why the happy face killer targeted women who were hitchhiking.
And although my friend Jenny will be very pissed off with me, but I also don't think criminalizing prostitution is the best answer to even dealing with that topic. So.
I'm very
another topic for another day. That's a whole other topic.
I'm very glad to hear that. But my for real final thoughts on this, which is another thing that would need to come up in another show, is that one of the biggest breaks for reality in Dexter is that serial killers are not twisted geniuses. They are usually just another privileged dude who assumes he can get away with it because his level of privilege means he won't be held accountable. And it takes so long to catch him because until the point where someone can't stop paying attention to it anymore, he's right. On that note, if this show has been in any way good or productive for you, please click like, click subscribe, check out the link on this YouTube channel, subscribe to the Patreon, follow me on Twitter at Eclectic Radical, follow me on Substack or subscribe to me on Substack at Eclectic Radical. Really need all the support we can get right now in independent media. Everything out there is corporate branded. Even in the podcast sphere, you're seeing this corporate Midas touch machine even overtake the quasi-independent but rich Young Turks. So we need real independent media. Please do everything you can to support the show if you support the show. Please support shows like Youri's show. Please support Substacks like the excellent Julia Doubleday and Justine Barron. On that note, everybody have a great week. I hope to be back next week with another guest. I don't know if it'll be Sunday. We'll see what happens. But keep watch, and we'll tweet at you.
Ciao, folks, and watch Dexter.